Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our cybersecurity program sessions. In case you didn't attend our earlier sessions today, I'm Sid Snitkin, and I lead the cybersecurity research portion at ARC. In the first session, we discussed the current situation in industrial cybersecurity and the ways it will need to change to support all the developments occurring in IT and OT. We concluded with some recommendations that every industrial company should be thinking about converging their IT and OT cybersecurity programs. There was a variety of reasons for that. But we know that this isn't easy and that every company will face a unique set of challenges that will constrain what they should be trying to do now, and as well as how they go about doing it. So to help people make these decisions, we've included 2 roundtable sessions with end users from different industries so that they can share their views, goals, and challenges in the programs they're trying to run. The hope is that these peer discussions will give everyone who's watching some insights into what you can do. Now, this is the first roundtable session, and we're going to focus on the specific issue of people and process convergence, which is, many would say, is one of the most difficult portions. And then tomorrow we have a second roundtable session where we'll have a different set of end users, and we'll be discussing technology convergence. Now, before I get to that discussion, I again want to thank all of our forum sponsors and encourage you to visit their booths in the exhibit area. You can do that by going to the lobby and clicking on the exhibit tab and then selecting the one for the industry forum. I think they have a lot of interesting information to share with you, and I'm sure they would be happy to discuss your own unique issues. Now, to frame this discussion we're going to be having, let me do a quick recap of my conclusions, my comments at least, the conclusions in my presentation this morning about IT-OT Cybersecurity Convergence. OT and IT people have long recognized the need for cybersecurity, and they've done their best, I believe, to address this issue. Not surprisingly, the differences in technologies and goals have led to the 2 separate groups that we see on the left side of this. There's 2 different programs, excuse me, on the left side of this slide. Today, we're seeing more sophisticated attackers and new developments that are forcing IT and OT groups to expand their programs to include a much broader set of assets, people, and processes. And companies are already starting to recognize that IT and OT cybersecurity convergence might be the best way to address these challenges. So for most companies, I would say the question is not whether they should be converging, but how they can make this transition and what they should be targeting as the end game for their converged program. Now that's the goal of these 2 roundtable discussion sessions that we're going to be having. And I want to kick off the discussion today with some of ARC's thoughts on these issues. The first point I want to make, let me change the slide, is that everyone should start with a clear kind of shared understanding of why they're considering convergence. This will help in gaining support from all the people who are going to be affected and impacted by these changes. Now, here are some typical reasons that we hear from our clients. Most facilities lack the funds today to address critical OT cybersecurity resource gaps. And convergence is one way that it can be a cost-effective way to gain that experienced cybersecurity support. And it also helps companies maximize the utilization of their cybersecurity resources. Most OT cyber programs lack the people and technologies to manage sophisticated attacks. Many companies have IT SOCs who are built for this kind of active defense. CISOs have taken a bigger role in ICS cybersecurity, and they're demanding consistent cybersecurity management across all systems. And IT policies and processes already meet these needs, at least from the perspective of the CISOs. And then digital transformation is going to require end-to-end security for all business processes. And IT-OT cybersecurity convergence can help to ensure this with centralized policy management, integrated threat information, and technology that supports fast and efficient cross-domain incident management. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if you have similar drivers in your organization, as well as I'm sure you have some of your own unique issues. Now, the second thing we would suggest is that you establish a reasonable goal for your program. And I think this gets to the issue of what people mean by when they say convergence. Now, here's 3 different models that we see companies considering. At least I call them different models. On the left, you see what I would call the collaborative model, which is pretty much what's done today to a certain point, but with a little more collaboration. In essence, in that kind of an environment, you have 2 separate isolated programs, just like you have today, but you try to do some more better collaboration on the places where you intersect. Now, the advantages of that, as you can see in the bottom part of that screen, is that kind of approach can offer you better isolation of your ICS systems. Well, isolation of both, to be honest. Both people are concerned about compromises coming from the other. But it has, and that's, could be a positive thing. But on the other side, on the negative side, you have duplicate resources, you're paying for extra tools, you don't really have visibility into the OT cybersecurity is one big problem that CISOs complain about. Now, in the middle, there's a model that I would call integration. And I'm trying to show with that picture, the overlapping. And the overlap is more where you have 2 teams still managed separately, but they collaborate on common issues. And if you were in the morning thing, you would see that outer band of that 45 record there. The outer part are areas where they really have the same kind of challenges, things like cloud, remote access, IoT devices, edge systems, and so on. So there's much more collaboration in working on that. And in that case, what you're doing is you're leveraging resources a little better. You're probably using similar tools so you can reduce the cost of tools and things like that. Now, on the right side is what I call the unified model or unification or something like that. And that's kind of the goal where you say, I'm going to essentially have one cybersecurity program, which takes care of all the cybersecurity in company. And maybe the OT cybersecurity is kind of a central core part of that, where IT is in there too. I don't have a separate white dot there for IT, but it's in there as well. The traditional IT assets, the traditional OT assets, and then you have one group that's managing everything. And the more you go to the right, the more you're kind of getting convergence benefits. The more you go to the left, you're getting isolation benefits. Now, one thing I think is true is that you're going to really probably need a blend of all those approaches. And there's a lot of reasons for that. One being that you're going to have different kinds of problems. I mean, there's some things that are completely isolated that there's no reason you need to converge that, control the security of that necessarily with the IT group. But, excuse me. But you also are going to have situations in most companies where you have many plants and you're going to have to go through a transition where you're going to need all those models in different stages in different plants. So let me move to this next one. And then the third thing I guess I would say is that I want to make is the need to have some kind of guiding principles. Now, these can be helpful in focusing your program, easing the transition, and getting the broad-based support that you will certainly need. Now, in this case, when I say that, to get those, the principles I laid out here, and I'm sure others would offer other ideas, but the first one is I think that we have to start off by saying that IT and OT cybersecurity are equally important. I'm an old automation guy, so I have this thing, and I deal with a lot of automation guys that say, well, we're the real crown jewels of the company. But I'm not so sure that people in IT would agree with that. I'm not sure that a lot of people would say that. So you need to kind of start off by saying both are important. Let's not say one is more or less important. The second comment I would make is that IT and OT cybersecurity convergence is more than just shifting OT cybersecurity into an IT cybersecurity organization. You're always going to need special people and processes and technologies to deal with unique OT issues. You're going to have them located separately and things like that. And then the third point is kind of the thing I made on the last slide. I mean, you really need to have a flexible program. You know, you have to plan for this flexibility and support different OT use cases. You know, these different systems vary in their ability to adopt IT, cybersecurity, people, processes, and technologies. The pace of convergence is going to vary across sites. And some OT systems will just always require separate people, processes, and technologies. So that was my comments, my introductory comments. But, you know, one thing I told everyone who's the panelists here today, we have a panel here of some, you know, very nice, very good end users who've agreed to participate in this discussion. And part of the reason for participating is they want to know what's going on, what their peers are doing, just like you probably want to know what your peers are doing. So one thing we decided to do was to have a few polls here where we could get the general sense of what different companies are doing on industrial OT, IT-OT cybersecurity convergence. So let me launch those polls, and we'll see, we may find some very interesting things here. But since we have this, all right, we have the polls, I'm going to now move on. And I want to introduce our panel for today. And then when we get everybody on the panel, then we can look at the results of the survey and use that, as well as some questions I've developed myself for the panel. So our panelists today, in alphabetical order, here's the way I put them, is Glenn Idell, who's the senior expert in cyber and automation security at BASF. Rob Cox, who's manager of operational technologies at Georgia Pacific. Ricky Eckhart, who's industrial IT cybersecurity manager at ExxonMobil. Michael Norris, who's director of business systems, security, cybersecurity at LyondellBasell. And Dan Rosinski, who's president of Industrial Cybersecurity and Digital Strategy Associates. So with that said, now I'm going to rather than give long introductions to each one, I've asked each one to give a little intro when we get into the panel discussion. So let's see how we're going to do that. Okay, there we all are. Now I think yep, I'm looking at my other computer, and yes, we're all there. So I don't know if anybody else is doing what I'm doing with the backup over there. So let's start in the order I had it there. I'll give you a chance to talk, and then we'll pull up those survey results. Okay? All right, so Glenn, you want to start first?
Yes, sir. Glenn Idell, BASF. Been in the security business, I guess, for 25 plus years. Been with BASF going on 25 years, and spent, I guess, better half of that in the IT side of the world. Last 10 or 12 years I've been on the engineering side, focusing on what we call automation security, OT security, same verbiage.
Rob?
Good afternoon, everybody. Robert Cox. I've been in the technology space for almost 30 years. First 10 years in the U.S. Navy. Then when I got out, started my civilian career working for an IT department that was actually responsible for industrial controls, reliability, and security. And then transitioned over to Georgia Pacific about 12 years ago. At the time, working for an engineering team with the same roles and responsibilities, and now I've shifted into the dark side, and I work for the IT organization, focusing on cyber governance for industrial controls along with architecture and design.
Ricky
Eckhart, ExxonMobil. As Sid indicated, I am the Industrial IT Cybersecurity Manager. This is a brand new role within ExxonMobil. It was created effective January 1st. And our mission is really to work across all of the business lines within ExxonMobil and try to develop a cohesive cybersecurity strategy that we can begin to drive forward. So this is my third year speaking at ARC. The prior 2 times was with my other hat on, which was focused on IT-OT architecture. So looking at new technologies to bridge the gap between the IT domain and the OT domain. So very happy to be here and looking forward to getting into the panel.
Michael.
Good afternoon. My name is Michael Norris. I work for LyondellBasell. I am the Director of Business System Security. It's a relatively new position. It was created about a year ago. And our role is to provide security support to on the OT side out in the plants. So we're about halfway through building out our organization. We spent last year really getting up and running, and this year is more about maturing. I've got about 30 years in an industry. I'm a chemical engineer background. I started with ExxonMobil actually out of school, and then I worked there for a few years, and I've been with Roundtable itself for 22 years. I have spent the majority of my career in automation and production and manufacturing. Prior to this role, I was in process engineering, believe it or not, for about 5 years. So it's a little bit different, but and I do have a relatively good understanding of what's going on on the OT side.
And Dan Rosinski.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dan Rosinski. I've got 37 years now in kind of manufacturing technology, mostly in the process industry. I'm a chemical engineer. I started with IBM, so I cut my teeth as a process engineer making semiconductor chips with IBM. But I kind of got the bug right at the beginning to get better tools in the hands of engineers and operators and maintenance techs and quality analysts. So that's sort of guided my career over the last 36 years or so. I've been with Aspen Tech, I've been with Roman Haas, and most recently with Dow Chemical. But about around 9/11 and shortly thereafter, I realized that all the technology we were introducing into our manufacturing plants had a dark side. That there was potential danger and risk that we were introducing by bringing data systems and process historians and manufacturing execution systems and advanced control algorithms and all that electronic information flowing over our networks could be used for malicious purposes. So about 20 years ago, I started viewing technology for manufacturing as a two-sided coin. One was the capability you wanted to bring, right, for better capacity, better yield, better reliability, better safety, better sustainability. But the other side of that coin, and you couldn't separate them, was the need to protect that technology, to make sure that you could lock in that advantage and not cause a loss of reliability or a loss of safety by introducing it. So for the past 20 years or so, I've really dealt with both sides of it. And for the last 8 years at Dow, I've been acting as a technology fellow with responsibility for the cybersecurity program in the manufacturing side, and also a piece of the digital manufacturing strategy that Dow was rolling out. So, I believe technology is already converged or is converging faster than the people and the processes are. So this discussion is very timely in my view to start talking about, how do we overcome some of those challenges and what can we do both individually, but as an industry, right, to start improving things. So thanks, Sid.
Okay, one thing I just want to make a big note of too for the people who are watching is, all of these people have, I don't want to say they're on the dark side. Some of them come from the dark side, some come from the other side. But it's a nice blend of people that have experience in both IT and OT. And so they understand those issues from whichever side it may be. Could we now see those polls? Let's just see. Hopefully we can see the results when I say see the polls. Excuse me.
Let's pull them up.
Well, if we can, we can. If we can't, we can't. All right, so this was the first one. And this was, who is the primary driver of IT-OT Cybersecurity Convergence in your company? And notice a lot of people said top management. I don't know why. Oh, I guess it's highlighted as the most popular. And then IT is pushing it. I'm assuming, notice one thing that surprises me when I look at that, I'm just making my own comments out loud here, is that the CISO is kind of low there. That many aren't being driven by the CISO, which is what I commonly hear. So that kind of surprises me. And OT and IT cybersecurity leaders are both about equal. So does that kind of align with what you guys see or not? Or I don't want to dwell on these too much, but does anybody want to say something? I got to move this picture because I'm hiding Michael.
Well, just from my perspective, that top management, I think, is a good answer because, well, I guess it depends on who they're talking about. Because if you have your CIO and your VP of manufacturing as top management pushing this, right, from each of their organizations, that's a really good place to be. And if they're in sync together, right? So
Yeah, at LyondellBasell, this I would say it's mainly driven by the digital security, the owner of the digital security group. But I mean, it goes all the way to the top. I mean, he basically has done a good job of selling it to our board, actually, about converging the organization. So, I think that's a good way of doing it, because it helps gain alignment when it comes from that level.
Anybody else?
I see this similarly. You know, it's the digitization efforts that are being driven from, you know, call it marketing, that are encouraging, you know, some of these converged processes. Whether that's good or bad is up for debate, but those are some things we see.
Hey, Sid, you know what's interesting are the two answers at the bottom. 8% and 10% either don't know or no one.
Right.
That's kind of a high number for both of those answers, in my opinion, collectively.
Do you think that 10% of the companies not, or no one, 8%, the 10%, you never know, because they just don't know.
Right.
But the 8%, do you think it's become really common now to push for this kind of conversion?
Yeah, maybe a little bit of tragedy commons there, right? Where
Yeah.
maybe they think someone else is doing it, perhaps, or maybe there just really is no push, right? Or maybe, you know, sometimes you have to learn by incident, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. No other comments? All right. Why don't we go to the next one? Okay. When do you expect IT-OT Cybersecurity Convergence in your company? Okay, now we have 29% that say they already have a converged cybersecurity program. I don't know what that means, but okay. I mean, everybody's going to have a different definition for that. The rest within 18 months, within 3 years, and only 24% are still evaluating. You know, those are the main answers there. So like 3/4 of the companies are actually doing something or planning to do something, which I find very heartening. But is that consistent with what you guys see in your companies and what you're experiencing?
Sid, you know, I learned from a guy in BASF a long time ago, you know, to always ask the question, you know, what do you mean by that?
Yeah.
And if you're talking about the convergence of security programs, I think, you know, a lot, at least from our side, you know, we're a lot closer to being converged than if you're talking about the people and processes for the day-to-day operations of it. So, you know, you can say that they're already converged on the policy level, but perhaps not in the actual day-to-day operations of the plant.
Yeah, I'm really surprised at some of these numbers, to be honest. I wouldn't think to see such a high percentage that already have a converge program, and then the next two saying within the next 3 years they will. So it's going to be interesting. Hopefully we get some questions that can help drive some of the discussion around what that looks like.
Yeah, I mean, that's your big interest, right?
Yep.
Yeah. And I think the first point you made about the fact of what do you mean by a converged program? You saw in my little presentation, I assume you all could see that. I mean, there's different definitions of that. I talked to some people and they mean, you know, essentially, you take the OT cybersecurity people, move them all into IT cybersecurity, and you got it all solved in their view. I don't think that's serious, maybe, but that's what they mean by it, just embed it. And the other one is, oh, okay, we already have some meetings every once in a while and we share some information, so we're converged. And that's far from what I think we're talking about here, what any of you want to do. I don't think you get the benefits and stuff like that. But anyhow, I find it positive, actually, quite positive.
Yeah, I think I'm not, that orange one's a little perhaps misleading, because it makes me think that those types of companies are at a mature level. You know, their programs are already fully in place, implemented, working well. But then if you look at the two below it, to see that many companies are doing something is very positive.
Yeah, you figure 70% are in the process of, or, you know, have done it. That's a really good number.
Yep,
So.
I agree.
That's why you start to wonder what they mean by the definition.
Yeah,
And I'm
Yeah,
not
and-
questioning the
Right.
definition. It's just it may not be the one that I showed on the right there. It may not be that far.
But it's probably different for every company, right? I mean, it's,
Yeah.
you know, some level, it's got to be a combination of technology, peoples, and processes.
Yeah, and if you think about some of the buzzwords that have gone through, you know, IT, OT, whatever, digitalization is another one of those buzzwords that's, well, no, I'm not trying to get, you know, but it's one of those buzzwords of, you know, getting data that we already are getting and just calling it something else in a lot of cases. And so, you know, some of these processes that have been, you know, maybe policy based or whatever, already integrated to some extent, you know, may already seem to include the converged, you know, people and processes in some aspects.
Okay, let's go on to the next one. Okay, why is your company considering convergence of your IT and OT cybersecurity programs? Now, in this, we did a select all, you know, so they could choose multiple reasons. And it looks like, well, the red down here is concerned about managing end-to-end security across IT, OT, IoT. So I'm the one who I made up these questions. So I made everything in the world about there. And people are saying that's what we want to do. They're concerned about managing. Now, I don't know how much they keyed on it. I'll be clear here. When I wrote the question, maybe I should have put it in bold or something. I meant this issue that I see, that I run into a lot in digitalization, digital transformation, whatever the term is, that you really need to have security that has the same kind of policies and everything from one end to the other end. And it seems to be becoming much more necessary today as we start moving things to the cloud. I mean, I talk to companies, you take an app that was in the plant before, now you move it to the cloud. Does that have the same policies in that application that you would have on other things that are in the plant, for example? So I was keying very much on end to end. I don't know if the person took it that way, and I don't know how you all feel about that.
Yeah, it goes back again to what do you mean by that? End-to-end security means different things to different people, I think.
Yeah, that's the problem we always have with surveys.
Yeah, I think the context here is really important as well, because from a cybersecurity perspective, we can look at it from both lenses. From an OT perspective, or they're really trying to protect their asset. And then we also have to look at it from the other side of the coin, which is we need to make sure that the corporation or the business network is protected as well. So do we have policies that can span both of those environments from a people and process perspective to ensure that we're protecting both sides of that coin with the right level of diligence? So there's different ways that I could read into this one.
When I see end to end on the orange line there, the first thing that comes to my mind is how everything's connected, right? I mean, we might not have direct control systems connected to cloud, but we are daisy chaining data up to cloud, right? And we know that edge devices are coming along, and you know, et cetera, and eventually mobile will be connected when you have 5G in your mills and facilities. And you know, that end to end is kind of a key comment, which is kind of good to see that was the biggest response.
Yeah, but I realize it's vague. That's one of the problems with polls. You know, I do a lot of polls and surveys, and you can never make a question. The best way is to go and talk to people. That's the best way, because then you can follow up and say, well, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, and we always face the challenge of the chemical sector being lumped in with some other sectors, and even within the chemical sector, some of the chemical companies are more standardized in what they make than others. You know, so you have some companies that are very diverse within the company, and so an end-to-end solution for one company may look completely different than an end-to-end solution for another, as well as, you know, one plant in a company, an end-to-end solution different than an end-to-end in another. So you know, that makes summarizing this data up to a management level or upper management level, you know, pretty challenging.
And the solutions could differ, but then we have to take a step back and say, do the guiding principles need to be different, right? And so I agree that we may have different solution sets, but the people in the process components, we can look at that from a guiding principles perspective and say, how do we pull this together appropriately?
Yeah, I think they have to be different. because even within inside of a company, you have different risk profiles for different lines of business.
Absolutely. There's not a one size fits all for large integrated companies like the ones that most of us work for.
Yeah. But I find it heartening that the second question, right, at 35% versus the end-to-end, because the second question does mention some of the new technology, right? But not as many people answered that one as the driver as they did the end-to-end. So I'm very, I will compliment the audience, right? The people who are on the call, because it really is an end-to-end. To me, the bigger issue is not how do you kind of secure a individual IoT device, right? It's how do you secure that device and everywhere that data goes or every connection that it makes. So yeah.
Okay, you want to go on to the next one? Okay, what is the biggest obstacle you face or foresee in converging your IT and OT cybersecurity teams? Overcome, well, the big one, obviously, overcoming cultural differences between IT and OT security professionals. That's the one I hear all the time as well. I didn't take the survey and force it. It's just, that's what I always hear. Reconciling IT and OT security goals and priorities, the second. And then addressing skill gaps between IT and OT. One that surprises me on this, very much surprises me, is getting operational managers to relinquish control. I just find that surprising. I go back into the steel industry years ago. I haven't done much work there for a long time, but the plant managers were like gods. I mean, they decided everything, and it was separate business units, and they were responsible to make money, and they wanted control of everything. And so, getting them to say, well, you're going to have to, if you have a problem with this, you're going to have to go through this process, this corporate process, to get some response. It's like calling up and getting a call desk, a service desk kind of a thing. That I would think they would be reluctant on that. But that's just my gut feeling. But you guys are living that. And then alignment with operational leadership. Okay.
Yeah, I think that if this was one of those questions, they were only allowed one answer. Their top answer is probably the first one, but
no, Glenn, it is a one answer question.
So I think that you're right. There would be a lot of them that, that last answer would probably fall into, but the cultural differences probably include that last answer.
Okay, I can see what you're saying.
I always find that interesting. Once you start having the conversations, once you identify the goals and the endpoint, and you set the priorities and you align on them, magically that cultural difference thing kind of goes away a little bit, because now you're working together as a team.
Yeah,
I think it shows up as an excuse a lot.
I agree with you. I think some of the, if we call them cultural differences, or just differences in skill sets and capabilities, however you want to frame it, right. I think that's actually an enabler. You need that diversity. You need the different experiences from the IT and the OT side. Yeah. And it's at the point of collaboration where you can unlock significant value. So if you can align on the objectives and the priorities, and like you said, Robert, pull in the same direction, you want the diversity of thought on your team. You don't want just one set of IT cyber professionals trying to solve a problem, or even just one set of OT cyber professionals. I think it's the interchange between them that you can really unlock that value.
Yeah. So it's really good news that last one, right? I mean, 3 years ago, I bet you that number would have been higher on alignment of operation leadership on the importance of addressing cyber. So 3 years, 4 years ago, but I think that number, if you took this same poll every year for the last 5 years, you'd have seen that number go down, because more and more awareness is being built, right, by operations leadership, that it's an issue that needs to be addressed. The threat is real, and they need to do something about it. And to Ricky's point, I mean, having more on your team than the engineers and the operations folks you've always had is pretty critical, right, to getting your hands around it. So
I made a comment this morning in my session, the first session, and the data I was doing, talking about the current state of cybersecurity. And one thing I did is I said, to try to assess that, you can look at qualitative information, you can look at quantitative. And I do market research, market studies. And if you look at the spending on industrial cybersecurity, I made the point it's grown, it's far more than doubled. I forget, it was like almost 250 or 300% over the last 8 years. And I took that to mean that people are taking it serious. And I think there's a lot of work on making awareness. There was in the standards organizations for years in particular, and the government. And hopefully that's taken hold. So, okay.
So Sid, I mean, and some of this is semantics. I think, it comes down to a trust relationship, I believe, between the organizations. And for example, historically speaking, IT organizations have been focused on low-cost providers, and large-scale decisions on outsourcing certain standard solutions. When you get down into the diversity of particular units, plants, whatever, you run into that balance of standardization versus diversity as it relates to profitability. And when you have a culture of decisions being driven solely by a low-cost provider, and then you want to trust that organization to then make decisions that are going to impact operations, it becomes a little more challenging. And I think so. That's why I think the culture aspect of it really bubbles to the top, in my opinion, because you've got this mindset of we're going to keep the plant up 24/7 and make product 24/7 versus an IT mindset of we can deal with a little bit of downtime here and there, and that's okay. And so that's what I see as this cultural difference that's still challenging to this day.
Yeah, I agree.
Go ahead.
I agree with that comment. What I see is that there still is a cultural difference, and the point is that most people in IT don't really recognize what we're doing out in the plants as far as running these plants. I talk to people in IT right now, and they'll say, well, I've been with the company for 12 years, 10 years, whatever, and never actually been in the site and seen what we do. We're a chemical company, for gosh sakes, and it is different. We're dealing with, plants that can, you can have very serious incidents at, and it's not like if you shut down a financial system, yeah, there's going to be an impact. But, if we blow up one of our plants, we probably would be out of business. And so it's a different mentality. And I'm not saying it can't be overcome, but there are differences there.
Yeah, Michael, I agree. I think that's why it goes back to you have to have a good set of diversity of experiences on these teams, so that for the OT folks, they can educate those IT individuals, and then leverage their skill sets in the appropriate way, point them in the right direction. But I agree, it's looking at those risk profiles and making sure that they understand that these high consequence events can be up to and including loss of life type scenarios. So it's a different mindset that they have to have, but it's something that the OT community needs to frankly help them understand as they're starting to subscribe to more of these IT type cyber services.
Yeah, and I think it goes beyond that. It goes to architectural changes that are taking place with some of the digitalization efforts and attempts to meet economies of scale for certain aspects, and so you have organizations making decisions based on what their objectives are. IT making their decisions and operations making theirs, and sometimes those don't always align with one another, and sometimes the changes in one side impacts the other without the other knowing.
Yeah, and I think you have to have some healthy tension there, because on one hand, from a digitalization perspective, they're doing those things to try to create value for the company, right? We're in the business to make money, however that is, and we also have to look for opportunities to drive costs down. And some of the digitalization efforts are either trying to create value or drive costs down. So we have to find a way to enable those, but with the right cybersecurity built into it. And that's where some of that healthy tension needs to come into play between these organizations to say, we would like to do this, here's the value proposition. And then it becomes a question of how do we do this in a secure and sustainable manner?
Right, and you brought up a good point. Specialization. You don't necessarily need a CISSP in every plant that you have. So areas where you have specialization, special skills, it makes sense to have some joint collaboration, some efforts there. But you also need the specialization of the operations manager in that plant and what he brings to the table, he or she brings to the table for that aspect. So having good bidirectional communication between the organizations, however that ends up, is essential.
Yeah. Another good analogy is your maintenance group. You know, who's going to support the equipment, right? You know, the conversation is very similar in the technology space. Who's going to support it, right? Who's going to secure it? So if those bidirectional communications don't happen, you're going to have a gap.
Want to go on to the next one? Go ahead. Go to the next. Okay, how's your converged IT-OT cybersecurity team organized? Looks like the popular one is independent IT and OT cybersecurity organizations that collaborate on issues that impact both groups, processes, technologies, etc. I don't know what I meant by that last part there.
I guess I'm not surprised by that. Honestly, you know, that's where we were as a company, you know, a year and a half ago. And I don't, you know, it's,
Yeah.
I think that's where a lot of companies are still operating. And I'm not saying we're totally converged, by the way. You know, we're on a journey and it takes a while to get there. But yeah, I mean, I think that I'm not surprised that it's that high.
So Sid, this kind of contradicts the other question that said, you know, they were converged. Now we're saying, you know, they're not really converged, they just collaborate.
No,
right?
we're getting
Exactly.
a definition of what convergence means.
Yeah.
Right? Convergence is more the maybe the middle one that my middle picture, where they overlap quite a bit and they collaborate on certain things, not just. To me, that first thing I had, for example, I don't know who keeps sending me. Oh, somebody keeps entering chats. I don't know if you all are seeing them or not, but it's hard to.
Us old people have a difficult time multitasking.
They're putting questions.
I am one, that's for sure. Let me tell you that. Yeah, and you know, that's like, it's funny, like I'm sitting here, to be frank, I'm moving around the poll thing so I can see who's talking, because it's much easier to listen and talk to someone when you see them. I forget what I was going to say, but anyhow. Okay, you want to go along with the next poll? Okay, where does responsibility for cybersecurity reside in your organization? Huh. CISO.
I think a better question would have been the accountability as opposed to responsibility.
Right, because for responsibility, I would like to see everyone.
Yeah, I know. I'm okay. I apologize. You guys are right. I should have used the word accountability. You're in big companies, so those words mean to have specific meaning. Or ex-military or something, where accountability is one thing and responsibility is another. I'm one of those easy guys. I get the idea. So, but anyhow, so responsibility. Okay, that would explain the CISO, right? What about the CIO? Oh no, and then the CIO for IT, Vice President of Operations for Manufacturing. That's probably the most common in my experience. I don't know about. I don't want to comment for you guys. I don't know.
Well, we've taken a little bit different approach. This kind of answers one of the questions that was out there. You know, there was always this concern about having IT manage the OT side in the area of cybersecurity. So organizationally, what we've done is cybersecurity has been pulled out of IT, and it now reports up through a global business solutions VP. And so therefore they're different organizations, and the digital security director of digital security, he has global responsibility for cybersecurity everywhere on IT and OT side. And so that gets rid of that issue about having IT taking control of taking control of the OT side.
Hey, Michael, does that individual have representation or accountability up to the board as well?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Good.
So they've kind of put another person in that takes care of IT and OT, so that neither IT or OT are the boss of the other.
Exactly. That's kind of the way.
Okay,
Gets rid of that argument.
So Michael, I've been preaching this for years, but curious if you've also incorporated physical security in that.
You know, we're talking about that. We haven't got there yet, but we have had discussions with them as well about that. But those guys are different, right? So.
Well, security is security. That's always been my selling point there, and you know, not making much traction the past 10 years. I've been preaching it, but you know, having an entity, you know, responsible for that from end to end, if you call it, It kind of goes back to the days when IT was under controlling. It really didn't make a whole lot of sense.
Right.
Yeah, but I think there's some progress there, Glenn. I mean, at least, the companies that I've seen and Dow Chemical in particular, the idea that physical security and cybersecurity come together. The next kind of ground to cover, I think, is process safety, right? For process chemical companies or process companies. So, and there's a couple of books. There's a book coming out this year from CCPS, and there's been some work done. So, but I agree with you. I think if you look at the world of security, a physical security event could have cyber consequences if that's the intent, right? If they've done some physical attack to, get wedged into a cyber attack, or more likely cyber events have a physical, impact. And then when you're in a process chemical or process, oil and gas, or, something that deals with hazardous materials, then the process safety side of it, we are so dependent as an industry on systems now. I don't see how you can not include the system security as part of that evaluation. And the industry, I think, is kind of coming around to that way of thinking. So
I'm getting confused. Just to clarify, if you guys would clarify. When people talk about safety, to me, I think of one thing, and when they talk about security, I think of another. I mean, physical security is something, it's got to do with access control, protecting the perimeters of the plant, all the physical things. And cybersecurity is another kind of security. And I thought when Glenn was first talking, or somebody, I'm getting lost here because of this thing in my face here. I know what I can do. Excuse me. There. Now I solved my problem. Are we saying that, because I think that's an issue that I hear a lot about, one thing is to combine cybersecurity with safety, the safety system design and things like that. And, there are models for cybersecurity that people are saying you should use a safety model to do cybersecurity, and the safety people like at ISA are integrating, trying to get involved with the security people and all that. That's one thing to make sure, because security can affect safety. But what about physical security? Are there different issues, or am I seeing a difference that doesn't exist here?
I think they're different issues, but there's maybe some hooks between them that are related, right? I mean, we don't leave our data centers and our rack rooms unlocked so anybody could walk in and unplug stuff, right? Some industries don't integrate their SIS with controls and vice versa for purposes of cybersecurity. So I just think there's enough relationship between them that have an impact to one or the other.
Yeah, plus you got badge systems, you got, cameras that monitor your fence lines. And I mean, there's a ton of overlap. I think it's only increasing. And what we found, over the last couple of years is, as those systems get exposed to the light of day, because a lot of those badging and camera systems, fence line monitoring, are really old, right? And they've just kind of been there forever. And as you start to bring those in the light of day, you realize that there's a very strong cybersecurity component that now needs to be considered when you upgrade those or you go to the next system. When you talk about identity management and user access, being able to tell that somebody's in, Peru when they're normally in, kind of Philadelphia, having location ability. Now you can do that purely on the IT side, but there's a lot of physical security contacts and data that you could draw from to help with that. So now I believe that that's a very strong area of cooperation that needs to continue.
Physical security and cybersecurity.
So Sid, to expand on it, in my opinion, the cybersecurity has more of a relevance to safety than it does to just IT. Why are we here trying to protect our OT assets? Yeah, the data is important, and so IT data is important, but we're mainly focused or concerned about the impact it has on environmental and safety related aspects. So I think that there's an argument that it has more of a relevance to safety than it does to regular IT asset data.
Yeah,
I totally agree.
Yeah, I mean, IP protection, intellectual property protection is important. It's always been important, right? But that's sort of That's sort of it's historical, it's been around. I mean, you kind of, everybody's realized that for a long time, right? It's not that you don't pay attention to it. The new thing over the last 10 years, 15 years, maybe 5 years, where it's really ratcheted it up is the ability to interrupt operations, right? Not steal secrets, but stop operations or put operations in an unsafe state, or, and that's, IP loss is huge, right? It's scary, it's terrible when it happens, and it can cost you a business. And there's been examples of that. But literally, kind of hurting people or hurting operations or hurting a community is kind of another order of magnitude, I think. So.
No, and I like the way one point you made. That resonated with me was, it's not that one's more important than the other, to be honest, because you have people who argue the opposite. But it's that one, everybody's known for years. Now everybody happens to be becoming aware of the other. It's not that the one's more important than the other. All right, I assume that was all of our polls, was it not? To whoever was pulling them up for me. I'm going to assume that was true. All right, I wanted to, we talked about some questions before this, and we've gotten some Q&A questions here. We get a lot of stuff in the chats, but right, okay. I see a chat here from somebody, that's fine. I assume, Rob, you're Rob? You're Rob, but did you just do a chat? Or is that another Rob?
I think that was from another.
Okay. Yeah. Somebody keeps posting. If
questions are listed,
could you post questions in the Q&A? I mean, because we're getting confused here. Panelists might be using chat and stuff.
Yeah, so just for the audience, if you want to post questions for us, there's a Q&A option if you want to just chat with somebody in the panel.
Right, and we have plenty of questions in the Q&A if you want to go in there. I think we've got about 13 questions in there right now. So
okay, but
where to start?
Let me just start with my own question, though. I mean, I've got control here. I thought I had control. I really don't. That's clear.
Control is an illusion, Zane.
You can tell I'm a control freak. But no, I mean, one thing, I just wanted to frame stuff for people who are listening. I mean, because, the idea of this was that there are people that are just starting on, I thought there were people just starting on IT-OT Convergence. Apparently from our survey, they're all done. But for those that are starting, I mean, I just think to start off, what do you guys think are the benefits and the drawbacks of trying to do convergence? I mean, and you can use your own definition of what you mean by convergence. I mean, even close integration. I don't mean necessarily combining groups. I don't want to get into that debate, but I made some benefits. I highlighted some things this morning. I thought it could save costs. It could give better security overall, better visibility, all those kinds of things. And I'm just trying to understand what you guys see as the benefits and the obstacles. Okay, so let me start. I'll start at the other end this time. Who was at the end? Dan, you go ahead. Yeah. We'll go.
Well, I was answering. I was typing in an answer to one of the questions. So somebody asked about technical convergence, and that's tomorrow. So skip me, so right. I can catch up. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Michael.
Sure. Yeah. I think the benefits are many. I believe that you get better support, you get better security. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure that most companies are the same as our company is, in that, we've had having a centralized approach to cybersecurity on the IT side leads to a lot of standardization. Things are done, very secure on the IT side. The OT side, it's every plant has been by themselves, and we try to manage that through standards and policies and driving them in a certain direction. But there was still a long way to go for a lot of these sites, and the security wasn't where it needed to be. So I think in the end, we're going to end up with better security. I know we are. I mean, we're already seeing it from our KPIs. And another benefit that we're seeing is, IT has a really good way of standardizing processes and getting, doing mass work with fewer people. And when you have a person at a site who's responsible for all the cybersecurity aspects at that site. He's also typically responsible for networking. He's also responsible for hardware. He wears multiple hats. Very few sites can manage, can afford to have just one person focused on cybersecurity. So I think you end up with a more efficient workforce. And what we're trying to do as well is we're trying to drive towards automation of some of these work processes that have been manual for years, because that's the way people have learned to do them. And and taking advantage of some of the knowledge base that's already in IT and using that on the OT side.
Okay. Let's talk about the benefits, and then I'll go around and ask you about.
Oh, okay. Because I was going to give a danger. I figured we could intersperse the benefits and the dangers, right?
Yeah.
Oh, there's dangers too, yeah.
Let's
So
talk
what are
about
the
the
dangers?
Let's talk about the benefits.
You want to do benefits first? Come on, Sid.
Do benefit. I mean, you want to add anything to what Michael just said?
No, I mean, I think the other benefit is, if you look at, when you stand in front of your board, right, for a company of any size, really, a manufacturing company, typically the CISO has presented cybersecurity as one of the risks in the risk register, right? So you've got to account for it. You got to understand what the risk is overall to the company, and kind of what elements, and how you're addressing those. So this OT and IT convergence, the benefit of it is it really sheds or shines a light into an area that the CISO has not been able to really characterize very well, right? It's been a risk. It is a risk. It's a growing risk, but there's been very little ability for that CISO or somebody to step up and say, okay, here's where that risk fits, right? Is it more than the enterprise risk of IP loss, or kind of the business side risk? Is it less? Is it the same? So that convergence allows us to get some more information and start understanding from an enterprise point of view, because it's not. I mean, we kind of talk about it as separate things, but Dow Chemical or BASF or Georgia Pacific, they're companies, right, that have kind of overall an enterprise strategy and an enterprise risk register. And in that company, there's finance and there's legal and there's commercial and there's businesses. And by the way, there's a bunch of plants that make stuff, right? So the overall enterprise risk, I mean, to bring them together is to shed some light on those and compare them as to what's the greater risk, and start arguing successfully for the right investment where the greatest risk is. So that's a benefit.
Okay. Others?
Yeah, let me chime in real quick, Sid. I'm going to go down to kind of a human level. I've spent my career in the technology space and been on both sides of the fence. And within Georgia Pacific, we use this term called comparative advantage. And every individual.
This is not whiskey, by the way, Rob.
It could be.
Nice tea.
Right. And everybody in the organization brings something to the table. They're each going to have their own subset of skills. They're going to have their experiences, and typically there's going to be something that you're really good at, right? So when I think of cybersecurity in the OT space, I think of it in two different views: one from an IT perspective, one from the OT. From an IT perspective, I think of my technology peers that are good at managing and supporting cybersecurity. They bring that to the table, and they could add value to OT and engineering organizations. On the flip side, if I have engineers that are spending cycles on applying Windows patches or trying to manage an antivirus update, that means they're not leveraging their comparative advantage as being engineers, right? So if I could provide that as a service to them, free up their time so they can then focus on higher value work, it's really a win-win. So I always try to make sure that when I talk about it's an advantage for the tech people to do some of this work for you, as long as they understand at the end of the day it is OT and it's not a print server, then there's value for you, for them to help you get to a better state. So they're not focused on, mundane endpoint type of security work, and so they can focus on engineering work.
Okay, thank you. Anybody want to add anything else to that from the point of view of the benefits?
I think Dan and Mike and Robert really hit the nail on the head. To me, it also goes back to one of the poll questions. One of the benefits is you get everybody to have the same priorities and objectives. And again, getting a group to pull in the same direction is going to be significantly beneficial. having that diversity of experience within, if it's an organization, if it's a governance committee, whatever it is that you call convergence, I think that's a huge benefit.
Okay. What about the drawbacks? What's the problems with?
You don't want to ask me about the benefits, Sid?
Oh no, I saw you looking down on the floor. I didn't know what you were doing. I was trying.
I'm writing. I'm taking notes. Yeah.
Oh, all right. No, yes, please.
No, I do think, there are some benefits that these guys covered. One of them being the open dialogue and open communication channels that are the communication channels that are being opened up between upper management in operations and upper management in the IT space. So I think there is some benefit there from having these dialogues and these discussions surrounding the topic. But I think I documented more drawbacks than benefits, so we'll get to that later.
Well, why don't you start us with the drawbacks then? Feel free.
Well, one of the ones that I have a real challenge with is the additional risk that tends to get introduced to leverage shared resources.
Yeah.
A lot of times we deal with diverse plants that have no communication or no connectivity and to the business environment, and then you have a standard process that an IT organization wants to implement to do something simple like asset discovery. And so you may have a skid unit device that's controlled by a standalone HMI, controlling a PLC of a skid unit pump that has no reason to be on the network for any purpose, but your IT wants to put it on the network so they can do an asset discovery scan. And now you put that asset at risk as opposed to that asset just being isolated. And that's one of the challenges when we start talking, and it's more maybe on the technologies as opposed to people and process. But if you want to take advantage of those skill sets that maybe a global organization has, you have to enable communication that doesn't already exist, and you really don't want it to exist when it comes to a best practices architectural model. So then you start looking at that drawback. What does that mean? You're introducing more risk. Another one being the buzzword bingo that starts getting thrown around. Sid, you've mentioned a couple things, and I've heard other people talk about KPIs or talk about patch updates or things that we just assume are good things, and we don't stop and ask the questions: are these really good things? Are they helping operations stay keep producing product? I'll let other people talk before I get to any of the other ones. So go ahead.
I was just going to make the comment the way you phrased, the way you finished there by saying, get to doing the real things. What I mean? As if the other things aren't important. And I'm not so sure. Again, my experience was always plant managers. Again, I go back a ways. All they cared about was getting stuff out the door. They were measured on how many tons of steel were out the door. And that is important, but it may not be as important as implementing some new technology that'll make it cheaper to do that in the future.
Right, and I think, I don't know if it was
something
Dan or
Ricky
somebody.
was saying, but it was maybe the same sense. I mean, there are reasons people want you to change things, and a lot of times people don't want to change because it's not their immediate objectives.
Yeah, and I think Dan or somebody made a point about the intellectual property. The loss of intellectual property may be more risky from a financial aspect to a company like ours than a particular plant being compromised, and being shut down. You may have one small plant that you may lose, a couple $100,000, $1 million a day if it's shut down. But you may have, billions of dollars of lost revenue for intellectual property. Right. So balancing out the security measures that are implemented, for on a financial aspect is important. And I don't think that a cookie cutter approach is always good. And so when we see it, you tend to see this IT driven cookie cutter approach to certain aspects that fits their outsourced model, but it may not necessarily fit the real risk factor for a given plant.
Yeah, not account for it properly, right?
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else want to throw any obstacles there?
Yeah, one obstacle that I think needs to be really considered is the cost of change to get to a converged state. Because when you talk about people and process, there is a significant change management effort if you're really going to try to converge organizations together. And you really need to understand the value proposition that you're going after before you go down that path. So I think that's something that, if there's a significant portion of the individuals on this call that have already gone through that, and they have a good indication of what that change is, that cost of change is, that'd be very interesting. But I think that's something that needs to be considered as a potential obstacle is, are you willing to go through the challenge of merging organizations together and making sure that that structure at the end of the day can deliver on the commitments that it was intended to deliver upon?
Yeah, and I'll add on to that because, in my experience, the other thing that happens is where IT has been kind of a service provider into manufacturing, and their goal was to get to lowest cost per seat, right? And so the infrastructure in operations and plants was all based on that IT service model. So put the infrastructure and get workstations to engineers, and when you start changing that mix, right, you're gonna unearth a bunch of stuff on the operations side that now is a cost, not just organizational cost, but real cost, technical debt, right? Systems that are old, infrastructure that now needs to be upgraded to handle the digital kind of requirements of the future. And cybersecurity becomes part of that, but it's a much bigger conversation. And where IT is, if IT kind of continues to just say, look, we just deal with the infrastructure, we're just going to do what we've always done, then operations has to realize they're going to have to absorb some costs that typically they would have figured IT would come to the table with, and it's not a good way to move forward, right? So I think what happens, or at least what I've seen happen, is you expose a bunch of things that have to involve both operations investment and IT investment to kind of bring the infrastructure and the systems to a state where you can now move forward, right? Either in better cybersecurity or advanced digital capabilities, but you kind of unearth a bunch of stuff that's just been kind of wallpapered over a little bit, right? Because you didn't really look at them together. So,
yep.
I think you just answered. I was looking at the questions while you were talking, and there was a question here. It says, curious, what do you guys think about the unintended consequences of convergence? Maybe a change in security architecture approach to align with an IT process, parentheses, CISO driven, that makes OT inherently less secure. And it had an example of removing an existing security layer or control or something like that. In essence, you were just saying that, I guess, right? Answering that. And I don't know if you read the question, but you were independent.
Yeah, we struggle with that a lot, but because too often our decisions get made that are outside the site's control. I don't know about other organizations, but being a large organization, a lot of IT decisions get made outside the site's control without the sites having any input into those decisions. Some of the technologies that IT chooses to go forward with, and as a result, we've mapped all of our compensating controls to, for example, the ICS kill chain, ICS cyber kill chain. Well, as you start looking at the technology changes that are being made outside of the site's control, you start seeing some of the areas where perhaps you're bringing the adversary closer to the assets than you're comfortable with, or at least than we're comfortable with. And I think convergence would help with the communication, but it's got to be a two-way street. You've got to be able to be at the table early enough in those IT decisions to bring up those security concerns and give factual data to support, okay, is it more beneficial, is the cost saving more beneficial than the potential risk that you're introducing?
Yeah, somebody always has to represent the business requirements, right? Absolutely.
That's almost a given, is it not, in a way? I would think in a big company.
I don't think it is a given, to be honest with you. I think that it goes back to Ricky's statement about making sure that we're all in alignment with common goals, and too often we're not. you've got some plants that count sheets of toilet paper because their margins are so small, and you've got other plants that, money falls off trees, and so it really depends on the actual plant itself. So one size doesn't fit all.
Well, the ones who count the toilet paper, I think, were prescient, given the last year. So they were.
Hey, we count toilet paper.
And you're happy about that? Oh, yeah. Yeah, we need toilet paper. Call Rob.
We do it intentionally.
Big rolls, right? I remember when I saw a paper plate, enormous rolls of paper.
Yeah. Glenn, your comment, think about a corporate, anything rolled out without site or facility knowledge or involvement, is an easy thing to solve, and too bad that has to happen, right? Because it shouldn't, especially when I think about IT and OT convergence, so, I've been involved and my team has been involved for years on providing a focus on the governance side, right? And, knock on wood, one of the things that we think we did really well early on, this was probably 5, 6, 7 years ago, is when we started to define governance, and I'm talking about security standards and policies, it wasn't done by the IT group. In fact, one of our, what I would say godfathers of OT governance, he was a controls engineer. And as we worked through that process, it was a team of security professionals, process control engineers, and technology professionals. And because of that, you get that mixed bag of people that Ricky was describing earlier, where everyone's vested interest is kind of accounted for and aligned upon. But don't get me wrong, there were some heated arguments, of course, but that always makes it more fun, right? So.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. It's that diversity of experience and skill set that you have to bring together, because what you want is those control system engineers to really be articulating, we can or can't do this because of the risk that it's going to introduce to the site.
That's right.
Then you also need some of those the enterprise cyber specialist that says, we're trying to do this to not only protect your site, but protect the enterprise. So where do we meet in the middle, so that we have a mutually beneficial solution or process to enable this?
That's right.
And like Robert said, I've been in some very, very passionate discussions about some of these topics. And you need to have that tension. And ultimately, you try to get to some middle ground where you can make mutually beneficial decisions.
Yeah. And usually you can, right? As long as you work through it and you do it with respect and absorb a little humility when you need to. So.
And you make sure that their bosses aren't telling them completely different things, right? I mean, that is an issue. You can get agreement among the workers, right? The experts, and then they get said, no, what are you agreeing to? No, that's not right. I don't want to do that. So,
Yeah, one of the other things that I was curious about, you mentioned, the resource utilization when it comes to patch management or something like that. And although I agree, it may not be the best use of an engineer's time to apply Windows patches. I guess the counter to that argument is, how would some centralized organization test a specific control system? Control system patch. No, that was my son calling me. So, you've got such a diverse, environment. You got multiple different plants, multiple different scenarios. How would any type of a central organization be able to, test and apply patches in a way that didn't compromise the integrity of the plant, much less the challenge of enabling communication down to those lower levels that, at least in our view of things, should never be communicated to from the IT side.
I mean, but those scenarios are can be difficult to figure out, right? And this kind of goes back to Mike's point earlier. If you're gonna leverage a converged space where your IT folk are supporting OT, whether it's infrastructure itself or even cyber, right? First and foremost, they've got to be OT aware. No different than they have to be accounting aware, right? You don't take down your accounting systems at the end of the month so that your accountants can't close the books, right? It's a funny analogy, but it's realistic, right? Sure. So you don't shut down your operation control systems So you impact safety, environmental, or production, right? So they've got to be OT aware, right? And I think once you get past kind of that skills and knowledge and truly understanding what your customer needs are, it's really not difficult, to be honest with you. Especially if you have some of that policy and governance in place that actually makes sense for the OT environment. So good examples within Georgia Pacific, we don't patch our OT systems every month. You know, we can't afford Bill Gates's monthly cycle, right? It's just not feasible. But we do have a model in place that, for the most part, a large majority of our operations folks can align to in a time frame that also reduces risk, but it does not hinder our operations. So that fine line that Ricky was just defining, you know, you can get there. And once you do get there and the alignment's in place, it's a lot easier to manage.
Yeah, I don't think I don't think anybody's advocating for one-click type patch updates.
No.
It's always got to be a collaboration with the defined change management window. And I saw somebody put in the chat, there's still a triaging aspect that's going to be required, probably at the asset level.
Yeah.
To make sure.
I think the communications part's the hardest, to be honest with you. I mean, I've sat in a mill before, and like even the process control engineers don't know that the paper machine is going to go down for a 12-hour outage, right? And if the engineer that's responsible for the asset from a control strategy perspective doesn't know, the chances of the IT folk know is even less.
Yeah, it's about zero. Yeah.
The communications between customer and owner of the system, operation folks, to the support folks has always been a challenge. And I don't have an easy answer. I wish I did. So I'm hoping maybe what you do.
And this isn't a criticism of IT. It's more a criticism of, you know, some things that maybe some of the other companies have done a better job at. If you look at the marketing material and the FUD, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt that the vendors put out there, you know, you're have to be constantly aware of a nation state attacker, and you have to, you know, implement all these security controls to protect against that nation state attacker. You know, to be honest, over the past 10 years, we've been monitoring closely our OT infrastructure for cyber attacks. The number of times that IT people or processes have negatively impact that data flow from the process is probably 1,000-fold, over the actual targeted OT attacks.
Yeah.
So you have a lot more likelihood of a process interruption or an interruption to data flow. Fortunately, the IT guys currently don't have access to the stuff that actually makes product, but that data flow out in your MES area or whatever, that's becoming very valuable data, and we have a lot more interruptions of that because of process interruptions or process mistakes or whatever it is on the IT side. So that becomes going back to the trust factor. If you're going to trust that organization to supply those synergies, you need to make sure you can trust that they're going to have the same attention to detail as your plant would.
Absolutely. And hopefully the consequences of the IT mistakes are nowhere in the same realm as the consequences of a nation state attack would be. So interruption of some data flowing versus a targeted attack at a control system need to be looked at through different lenses as well.
Well, yeah, they do, but that's the whole point. Do you want to expand the footprint of the standardized IT processes to the point where they could impact production? So right now, because they don't have a footprint there, they can't impact that. However, if they were then managing the patches or managing some of the other aspects, the network infrastructure components, and then a common vulnerability or a common flaw in one of those causes a company-wide outage as opposed to just a single plant outage. That's where I don't know that everybody's really looking at whether some of these convergence ideas are a good idea.
You guys have been talking about processes. That was going to be my next question, but what I'm hearing is, IT processes. Is there a limit? I mean, maybe it's probably a case-by-case thing, but there's certain processes. One thing I think is true, and maybe you've probably all going to tell me I'm wrong. I don't know, but you know, when I look at IT systems, and I deal more with suppliers, and I mean, a lot of suppliers and things, so I'm constantly barraged by the same kind of comments that Glenn had mentioned. But, you know, they do adopt much more sophisticated technology. They've got much more, I'd say, sophisticated security programs. Now, maybe they need them more, I don't know. But if you try to take some of the tools they have, and we didn't want to talk about technologies today, we wanted to focus on the people and processes, but part of that is they have processes in place. They've got a lot more governance, I think, at least I think they should, you know, on managing passwords, managing things like patches. Now, maybe they do patches automatically and they do things that you wouldn't want them to do, but they have a lot of processes in place that I would think could improve the security of plants. Now, maybe based on the comment Glenn had made just a few minutes ago or so, you know, it doesn't sound like you get anywhere near the kind of problems in the plants that you get in the IT systems. So maybe I'm missing the point here or something. Well, no, you were talking more about problems they cause, weren't you?
Yeah, but more about
problems caused in the plants. Okay, that's
yeah,
a different question.
so when a lot of the sales pitch is about these targeted attacks on your OT environment, but what we see from a reality perspective is human mistakes, people or process mistakes,
Right.
and those people and processes tend to be due to, you know, a one-size-fits-all cookie-cutter approach to a lot of things, and you lose the economies of scale when you start having specialized processes for each individual plant, because their process is a little bit different. You know, when you have a global organization and you can have one patch management system that, you know, you roll out, you know, 90% of your patches with in one click of a button, and you know, that makes sense. But when you have to have specialized processes for each individual plant and you've got thousands of plants, it makes it a little more challenging, and the cost benefits kind of go down.
Yeah, and I think, well, I mean, one of the Q&A comments was interesting because it talked about the technical career ladder, right, broadening if you start converging OT and IT. And so, Glenn, I mean, if kind of BASF decided to put you in charge of the IT organization that was delivering to OT, you know, it would build in the awareness of that kind of differences, right? Those kind of uniquenesses. Now, I'm not saying you could know how to solve those, because I agree with you, right? The unique solution by plant or by site, you know, might not lend itself very well to kind of IT global processes. But I think that cross-pollination, right? I believe that we probably are growing a whole series of engineers, right? Chemical engineers and people who are going to go into maintenance and quality who have gotten a much better, at least grounding in technology, the use of technology, right? So building on that to help them understand how that technology works, along with what they're actually trying to do with the technology, which is make a product, right? Or test a product or maintain a piece of equipment, right? Suddenly then, you know, I think we're getting a better view and a better ability to extend, okay, what makes sense out into that OT space, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I
totally
think that's a great point.
Yeah, I agree. It's going back to Mike's comments too about some of the IT folks that he's worked with. They've never been out to a facility.
Right.
Well, those aren't the ones that you establish to that you pick to establish your converge cybersecurity organization.
Correct.
You want to take somebody that has the experience, that can build out the right framework and processes and the right criteria for technology selection to make sure that you're doing something that's going to be successful.
And what we've done is we got a mix. We have a lot, mainly people from the OT side, but there are some people from the IT side, and it's a good mix. And, you know, and we talk about, I heard a lot of comments about, you know, IT rolling patches out, IT doing this. It's not IT. You know, I'm not part of IT. I'm part of digital security. We're a different organization, and the people who are actually doing this work, they know what they're doing. It's not like we pulled a guy out of field services that's you know, been working on you know, replacing keyboards. You know, these are guys who actually know what they're doing when they're out working in these plants. You know, and then when I was talking about automating processes, you know, prior to last year, every server that was patched on the OT side was physically touched. Someone would actually physically be out there in the plant. And I remember talking to them when we first created this organization. We said, hey, you know, we need to start looking at better ways to do this. We need to figure out ways that we can be more efficient. and people got red in the face and didn't want to talk about it. Oh, no way, you can't do that. You have to be there. You got to be there in the plant. Well, guess what? COVID happened. We couldn't get in the plant, and we figured out ways to do it remotely. We're actually patching our machines now remotely. People are sitting at home, actually physically doing this work, which is the first step towards where we're trying to head. So I think we, it's I think there's things that we can do to improve, and that's really what we're trying to do.
Good
Isn't
point.
that one of the problems? I would think, in the past, we've had discussions at our forum, about training OT people to become IT, to learn more about cybersecurity. And we've had these discussions, is it better to take the OT people and train them to become cybersecurity, or take IT people and train them on OT, and all of that kind of stuff. But the one challenge I think you have, it probably, a good guy is a good guy, probably regardless of where they are, good woman, for those who might be listening. But but in the end, one thing I always find is when you try to talk to people, and for the example you just said, Michael, people come at things from their backgrounds, and they don't know they're coming at it from their backgrounds. So they will take certain positions because that's the world they live in. That's how they view the world.
Right.
And it's really hard to get them to open up their mind and just say, but wait a minute, we understand that. The first they think you just don't understand. But I think that really makes it hard. So sometimes taking some OT people that I know a lot of engineers, and I just would never get them to ever admit that you could allow somebody to work from remote or do something like that, rather than take the issue and just say, listen, we have to enable outside work. Now, how do we do it? Please tell me. It's a really hard step to get people to take that, in my opinion.
Yeah, and to go back to something that I've reiterated a few times here, diversity of skills and capabilities. You want to have somebody that has an IT background, that is they're partnering with their OT counterpart to try to solve a problem, because the IT person is going to come with the background of, how do I automate this? How do I develop this and this capability, or leverage this technology? And they may be way off base initially. And that's where you need that OT context to say, well, that's not going to work because of X or because of Y. But that problem solving process is where they're going to end up with a solution that is mutually beneficial. That's why diversity of skills and capabilities is absolutely critical for these convergence conversations.
And going back to it, open dialogue and being able to disagree professionally on topics, and having a forum for presenting those disagreements and why there are challenges associated with them. And sometimes you'll find a solution, and sometimes you may not find a solution that meets the requirements that are being set forth.
Absolutely.
Here's a question. It was an anonymous attendee, so I better ask it now. It says, how does, and this could be very relevant to what we're just talking about, how does any new employee achieve an operations mindset? Through training, familiarization, socialization, are the typical means anyone can learn, in my opinion. Maybe he was making more of a comment, but is there some way that, like Ricky, you're putting together an organization there. Do you have some method that you're finding, or are you planning to use to try to get those people? And you must have like a training program, if you want to call it that. I'm going to use training in quotes. Whatever that involves. That you're going to have a program saying you're going to come, but you're going to go through these stages.
Yeah. So what we're trying to pull together right now is an industrial cyber talent program where we take some of the IT cybersecurity professionals, we get them exposure to the OT space, and ideally we want to work with our business partners and try to get some of their experts and bring them over. We've actually done that quite a bit within our upstream business lines. We have some upstream instrumentation and controls specialists and professionals that we now have in the IT organization that's providing different skills and support to other business lines. And so we're trying to take these different experiences that people gather through various assignments and then identify a process to filter those talents through a pipeline so we can start to cultivate the right cyber skills and competencies to support what our business partners need. And it's going to take time. And unfortunately, right now it's a little bit opportunistic, but we want to get a lot more structure around that through the coming years.
But isn't that, I mean, what you just described, the way I heard it at least, was more around selection of people who would be candidates, as opposed to once you select them, you still need to say, okay, you know, you're basically an IT background. We want you to get more familiar with the plants, or vice versa. You know, if you take an OT person like Michael's done, I think you said a lot of your people are OT background. Do you have any programs that or recommendations for people or general strategies as to how to do that training, whatever it is they need? Is there a program or anything in mind? You know, do you spend so much time in a plant and then you also spend so much time in IT, or based on your background or something like that?
We don't have it fleshed out to that level of detail yet, Sid, but ideally it would involve plant level experience. But again, the situation that we're all in right now from a COVID perspective, I'm not sure how that's actually going to work. So we're looking at alternate means to do that. And you know, we also have to be sensitive to, we don't want to just jump on Zoom calls with folks that are at the sites as well, because they're very busy, they have a job to do, and we don't want to distract them. So again, right now what we're doing is leveraging some of the more OT skill sets that we brought in from the business lines into our organization to help train up others.
Okay.
Yeah, and the other side of that, Sid, is, I mean, there's a huge effort. I mean, at universities, I mean, MXD in Chicago and ISA, looking at how do you take OT resources, OT people, and get them cyber aware, and even start building additional cyber, you know, kind of skills into them. And, you know, so there's, you know, I mean, ISA does it through partners, AE Solutions and Dragos and others. I mean, there's a bunch of people out there building courses, right, to take OT knowledgeable people, right, you know, engineers and maintenance techs and, you know, whatever their background may be, and give them some at least basic building blocks. And I think there's fertile ground there. I mean, I believe as I run around Dow Chemical, there's people that have been shadow IT guys, even though their title was process engineer or production manager or maintenance tech. I mean, they've been building spreadsheets and they've been doing all sorts of stuff. You know, the idea is to take them and turn that kind of interest and that, you know, kind of desire and that passion to use kind of information technology and really guide them towards either cybersecurity or, you know, in the digital world, you know, becoming part of the answer of how do you move manufacturing from, you know, forward into the, you know, the fourth revolution. So, you know, that's if you look around and, you know, I mean, University of Maryland, University of Virginia, I mean, UT, I mean, there's programs growing almost everywhere you can look in terms of training manufacturing people in cyber concepts. And some of them go deeper than that. Yeah.
But a lot of that is more around awareness.
But it's not. I mean, they're getting to the degree where they are, if for the people who are interested, it's awareness. That's where it starts. But for people who want to go further, right, those programs are now getting deeper, and, you know, they allow you to really go pretty far. So
anybody else?
I think we'll have a bunch of OT people that will want to do that if we give them the time and give them and show them that there's an opportunity there. So
as long as you don't have to call themselves an IT person.
Right.
Yeah.
I like the comment. There was a comment. We had a discussion. Rob was on the panel. This was, I think, last year or year before. We had a discussion, a panel discussion on IT-OT Convergence, and we had 3 people who were CISOs, and then we had 3 people that were more from the operations side. Rob was on this panel. And one comment I just loved out of that in the end was that somebody made the comment that you had to kind of view it as a cybersecurity professional. Didn't matter whether it was IT or OT, because that gave them a path that they could grow through. You know, they didn't want a lot of, like, people who are in OT might say, wait a minute, I'm a senior engineer right now over here. Now you're going to send me over there and I'm going to lose, you know, that stature or whatever that is that you lose by going there, as well as your career path. You say, I don't want to get out of that. I've had that in my past where I was asked to take another role and I was very reluctant, and, you know, but it ended up very good for me. But it was just a whole different thing. And so I don't know how you, anyhow. So I've always thought that a lot of engineers would not want to do that. Maybe I don't know that I would have whenever I was young. I don't know.
But let me add something to what Dan was just talking about, especially in the education space. One thing I think is going to happen, and I wish it could happen sooner, but naturally, time and technology is going to help us get to the better state in cybersecurity. Here's why. for the better part of the past 20 years, I've been worried about Microsoft security vulnerabilities and patches. It's part of my career. It's part of my job. I live it. I got a 13-year-old who's had a computer now for 2 years. He's never once concerned himself security patch. And he does it because he doesn't have to. He's got a phone in his hand that patches itself. You know, the vendor, the ISP is handling some of the network traffic vulnerability scanning stuff. His computer that he uses for gaming updates itself. Eventually, we're going to be in a position where these younger folk are coming into the space, and they're going to start demanding our technology providers to have better processes, to have better technology where they're not having to man touch every single keyboard and mouse out there and do it in a way that stays safe, right? That's going to catch up to. I mean, look at the board today. Is there anybody of us under 40? Maybe Ricky? Naturally, that selection process of these younger folk coming in, I think is going to start hopefully demanding better processes in place to handle some of these gaps, right? Because they don't want to be manually installing patches on 200 computers at a facility. That's just crazy to them, right? It's crazy to us. Imagine how they feel.
I guess
You better check your bank
the
accounts
argument.
if it's you said your daughter or your son.
Yeah.
You better check your bank accounts to make sure nobody's hacked them and gotten into that stuff.
Yeah, I guess my argument to that would be, you're not dealing with Phosgene on your phone.
I know.
Yeah, so.
But we all know that it could be managed and processed better, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
What I see as one of the real challenges to this, and some companies I think are doing it better than others, especially companies that have more standardized, deployments of their manufacturing environments, is the more you standardize, the more you can standardize your processes. The more diversity you have, the more unique each plant has to be. So if you're going to continue to be diverse, you're going to always struggle with that. If we have to go in and re-IP 4,000 different plant DCS networks so that they could communicate with an IT system, so that somebody can do an asset discovery on them, what's the real value there? You're putting them in at a higher risk without really adding any value. And so that same with upgrades. You've got a system that's been running, for 30 years. I think it was a guy from Dow. What was the guy's name? Yeah, just talked about a controller that they made in house, in the 70s or whatever, that may actually still be running. So you've got these processes that are making money for the plant. What's the justification for shutting all that down just to put the new iPhone app on it? Sometimes there's benefits, sometimes there may not be, but it's going to be a case by case basis, I think.
And I think tomorrow's panel, when we talk about technology, I mean, there's, I don't know how many crossovers we have, but, this idea that ABB and Siemens and Emerson and Honeywell and Rockwell and GE all have a responsibility as part of this answer, right? To make that more seamless, more no touch, more, I mean, they've got to learn how to partner with, whoever they need to partner with, Microsoft, IBM, I mean, to make those things work and not affect the operation of a control system or whatever it is that system's supposed to do. So, and I've had discussions with, most of those, and they realize that. So they're starting to come to the table. I just think it's not where it needs to be. So.
Right.
Yeah. The challenge then becomes commodity based. So you can buy a controller from Siemens and the software from ABB and make them all interoperable. Where's their intellectual property benefits?
Where's the competitive advantage? Yeah. That's tomorrow, Sid. So don't let us go down this track now.
Now, what I'm doing here right now, guys, is I'm sitting here looking at the questions. I don't know if you've seen them.
Yeah, there's like 18 on there now.
Yeah, there are a lot of good questions. I don't think we're going to cover them in 10 minutes, though.
No, I don't think so either.
Bunch of stuff in chat, too. Some good comments there.
Yeah.
I'm getting bombarded. Like I said, and you are too, I assume, on your screens. Are all these chat ones popping up?
Yep.
Yeah, it's hard to watch you people whenever that's happening. I'm trying to see, you guys, you don't mind if I say that we'll look at these afterwards, any we don't answer? I mean, we haven't answered many, because I think hopefully we have, because there's been a lot of good discussion here. And what I think we were all hoping for, I know I was to just let this be a roundtable discussion. I mean, you guys have done a wonderful job, made it very easy for me. One person will say something and then people were commenting on what, I mean, that was exactly what I was hoping we would get out of this. It's just that a 1 hour or whatever panel discussion is great, but it isn't enough to really get into the issues, to solve problems. It's only just sharing ideas and thoughts and stuff like that. So what I was going to say is we can get, we'll share these Q&A things. I think Larry O'Brien is probably copying them, or we have access to them after the fact, and we'll share them with you. And we'll also make sure that we, if you guys can offer to answer whatever you can answer, if there's something you have a comment on. That's what I'm saying. And
So,
we'll share them with everybody.
So Sid, is there going to be some type of open, forum, chat room, something that we can try our best to answer some of these, and then have participants, ask follow-up questions if we're not really, hitting the right question?
I'll check on that. Okay. I don't know how that works. I just don't know, that it varies in every platform. We have vFairs, and what we're doing is a Zoom meeting right now, but it's being hosted in vFairs. I don't know what of this stays in Zoom, what of this goes into vFairs. I don't know if it stays in Zoom, we can take it and build something. Maybe if we don't have a tool there, we could do something with ARC. We have other kinds of Q&A things, but we'll do something like that and share them with everybody. Because I also want you to, you can look at the questions, but I don't think anybody's been sitting here writing them down. And you also haven't heard the answers, and I'm sure everybody would like to see that. Again, whenever we talked about this originally, it was to try to, you guys all want to share and with peer kind of discussion, and that was part of the goal here.
Yeah, so I guess the question I have, some of these questions, you've got 3 tabs there that are opened, answered, and dismissed. You don't have like one where you can copy and paste the entire thread. I'm assuming that the host of this will.
You can go and copy, if you want to copy all the open, then you can click on answered, and then you can click on dismissed. I don't know.
To Glenn's point, we were kind of hoping somebody at ARC would do that, because it's valuable stuff.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, the way, and he phrased it that way, isn't there some way it's open? I caught that. I caught that.
I don't know, your vFairs webinar account, the voice of God on this thing sometimes, can't they grab all that stuff?
Yeah, so that all happens automatically. It's all recorded.
Okay.
We also have a ton of things under chat here, so.
Yeah.
I don't want to get into another, big topic here, because we only have 5 minutes left. Is there any question anybody of you guys want to ask anybody else? I mean, I don't know, each other, about how you're doing or something. If you have a particular problem you want to bring up, but apparently not, nobody's speaking, so.
Well, we've talked through a bunch of them, Sid, in the conversation.
No, I know we have. Yeah, I know we have.
So this is Larry. I'm just chiming in briefly. There is a lounge in vFairs where you can go talk to other people. So if you want to go hang out there,
you can chat with
other
the people
can
there,
approach you with questions. Yeah.
Does Andy buy the drinks there?
Yes,
I was going to say I was going to buy everybody beers at the bar afternoon. That's for those who haven't come to an ARC forum before. That's exactly what we do. Is we have this, and then normally we have our opening of the reception, the exhibitions tonight. So we all go and have a good time at that reception. So we didn't do that. We don't have a chance to do that, though. I did suggest we look into that. There's somebody I saw that was sending certificates out, like where you could call Grubhub.
Yeah, nice.
Come and participate in the webinar during lunch, and probably got people to participate. I thought, probably did. But, all right. Well, I think we've had a good discussion. I'm personally exhausted. I've been doing this since 8 this morning, so I really appreciate that you guys participated, and you all have agreed. We'll get you the Q&A follow-up stuff. You'll add your comments, and we'll try to get that out to the people who put their name down. If you look at the Q&A, sometimes a lot of them I saw were more comments, then, which is wonderful. It's just we can't, at our normal forums too, we would have had someone running around with a mic and they would be asking the questions and you get that engagement. We couldn't do that here. We certainly couldn't find a way to do that. Working from home is fine, you know, and remotely, as we all know, but it's not quite the same. So with that, let me thank you guys, and we'll let you go.
All right.
Have a beer, have your whiskey, your beer, whatever. I'm gonna die. This is really a bottle of whiskey now.
Looks like a bottle of Jack.
It sure does, doesn't it? Not to mention it. All right, guys. Thank you so much.
All right. Take care.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. We'll see you. Bye-bye. Goodbye.